Hi, everyone, and welcome. I know we only have a short window of time, and this is a big topic, so we're going to jump right into it. I'm Shara, CEO at Carallel, and I'm thrilled to be able to host this conversation with Dr. Jeff Rubin and Terry Donovan. For those of you who don't know Carallel, we provide support and assistance to family caregivers throughout their caregiving journeys. Our team of care advocates, of which Terry is one, are caregiving experts, and our digital platform, My Care Desk, has been designed to provide caregivers with the information, resources, and tools they need to better collaborate, to be more confident in decision making, and just to make caregiving easier. So in the short time we have, I'm going to pepper Jeff and Terry with some questions. You can find bios for both of them and information on their backgrounds in the handouts section, which is included with the webinar. If you have questions or comments, please submit them through the chat or the question functions. We'll do our best to get to everyone. And if we can't, we will follow up with you offline. To get us started, let's hear a little bit about where each of you are. I'm going to launch a poll here and would love to hear what your personal experience is with caregiving. Are you currently a caregiver? Have you been a caregiver? Do you know a caregiver? Let's get your input here. Okay. I think that's probably good in the interest of time, and we'll share those results with you here. So most of you are currently caring for a loved one or have done so before, or are looking forward into the future on that journey. So let's get into it. There's been a lot of mainstream media and increased awareness of mental health and mental well-being, from celebrities to athletes to the news. We're perhaps seeing a sea change in awareness and acceptance of mental well-being and mental health, removing the stigma around that. And so in addition to that, we're increasingly familiar with the concept of caregiver burden. So Jeff, can I ask you to talk a little bit about caregiver burden, what it is, and perhaps more specifically, how it relates to stress and impacts anxiety and mental health?
Sure, happy to. Well, caregiver burden is really a form of stress, right? It's the amount of stress that one feels taking care of anyone, whether it's a loved one or a good friend or whatever. But they divide caregiver burden into three different kinds of burden. One is the stress burden, and that's the anxiety that's normal, that you feel every day taking care of somebody. The objective burden, and that's you have so many tasks and so many things to do, and then you have your own life's task. And when the burden of caretaking takes over the burden of your own life, that becomes objective burden, it's called. Finally, the last one is relationship burden. This comes in all kinds of forms too, and affects all kinds of relationships. Not only is it the burden between caretaker and the person that's ill, but extended family, anybody involved in the care or involved in the family. But the stress we usually measure, caregiver burden, is on that one person who bears most of the stress, even when the stress is split. Most of the time, I think that there are certain things that people feel that are very common. One is to recognize the stress and normalize it. And by normalizing, I mean it's common, it's normal, it's natural to feel stress when you're caring for somebody. It's intense and exhausting. So you feel tired, You feel you often can't sleep well, or your appetite is affected, or drug abuse increases, and that's both street drugs and prescription drugs, and the things that go with depression and stress, meaning I feel sad, I can't sleep, I can't eat, those kinds of things. And very often stress, caregiver stress, will migrate into anxiety and depression.
Yeah, and Terry, as a care advocate interacting daily with caregivers, can you give us some examples of the stress that people express and whether they recognize or not, can sort of name it or acknowledge it?
So yeah, there's a couple different categories, and the thing when I get a call from somebody who is one with their stress at the time, they'll say, "I'm overwhelmed. I want to pull my hair out. I can't do this anymore." So that's when they recognize it. And when I hear that, I'm like, "Oh, they know it. They're ahead of the game." And then there's something that comes with the isolation of caregiving. You know, they'll express, "I feel all alone. I have no time to myself. Um, no one understands or no one gets what I'm going through." So these are all common experiences that I'll hear from caregivers. Um, then there's a category of when the stress reaches the point where you're frustrated, and folks will say, "I'll snap at my loved ones or coworkers or friends just out of the blue," or "I'm angry all the time." So those are the ones that come out. And then the ones that maybe people don't recognize where their stress is, they'll just kind of let something slip that says, caregivers will say something like, "I'm just not sleeping," or "I'm sleeping too much." And the same with eating and drinking, which includes, like Jeff talked about, alcohol and drugs. So those are just some of the ways the stress can come out and be observed.
Yeah, thank you. Well, so let's try a second poll and see where those of us who've joined us are feeling or placing themselves today. So let's put this out. How stressed are you for our attendees? Are you calm, cool, and collected, or are you at a point where there's an overwhelming feeling to the stress symptoms you're feeling? Okay, so let's see where we've got. All right, so sort of a bell curve here, with most in the middle of it's starting to impact daily life, which is I think pretty common in the interactions that we have on the help desk. So Terry, when you hear indications of stress or anxiousness, are there things you recommend? What are some basic tips and tricks for dealing with the daily normal stressors that caregivers face?
One of the main things I recommend folks is just a simple exercise of taking 3 long, slow, deep breaths, just to sort of act as a break in the moment of stress, anxiety, frustration. The other ideas out there to manage long-term stress is there's lots of mindfulness apps that are out there. Asking for help, we'll be talking about this. I try and drill it into anybody who calls in or emails in. It's okay to ask for help. And then taking a break, going for a walk. If you're with somebody that you can't be away from long for a period of time, just go into another room for a minute. Doing those things in the moment to relieve the stress. One other idea is if you can find a friend or a relative to set up as an accountability buddy, that you can text or go to and say, hey, can we schedule a talk? I need to talk. So those are just some of the ideas.
Yeah, thanks, Terry. There's a lot to be said for the importance of taking time for yourself, and that it's restorative and necessary rather than just a nice to have. But it is often the first thing that people eject in their list of tasks that they need to address. So what advice would you give to someone about overcoming barriers to taking time for themselves? Let's start with Terry, and then maybe Jeff, you'll have some thoughts too.
So, and when I talk about 3 deep breaths, because that's my main recommendation, is try and setting up a schedule. Set up in your smart device or your smartphone with an alarm, with a pleasant sounding sound, and scheduling 3 deep breaths 3 times a day. And building that into a habit to build that skill.
Jeff, thoughts?
Yeah. Here's the thing, is that anxiety and stress is more than just a mental experience. It releases all kinds of nasty hormones. The 2 most common being adrenaline and cortisol. So to do something physical to address those things also builds up your resiliency. I think Terry's breathing is a perfect example of that, but there's lots of them. There's just going for a walk. There's just standing up and, every 2 seconds and sitting back down. You don't want to make yourself fidgety, but, anything that moves. And breathing's your best friend. The only thing I would add to Terry's thing is, remember, breathing, if you take yoga, do not breathe like yoga. Yoga is stimulating. What you want to do is relaxing. The space between the deep breaths should be at the bottom. Also is to allow yourself just to feel. A lot of the stress and a lot of the exhaustion comes from, there's a myriad of emotions, especially if it's end of life care. It doesn't have to be end of life care, but if it is, it's really stressful. And you'll go through all the conflicting experiences that people feel. It is normal. And one of the things I'd like to normalize right away is the feeling of, oh my God, is it over yet? Or to be able to say something like, I know it's over. I can tell that guy's milking me. And to get at what the truth is, and to get at how you take care of somebody and deal with those mixed emotions is really the task at hand. And just expect to feel and give yourself space for it.
Yeah, thank you. So, everyday stress is one thing, and we all confront and deal with that on varying levels every day. But for many, mental health and wellness is an exacerbated challenge. So, Jeff, can you talk a little bit about the progression or the spectrum for people and how caregiving can play a part? And while you're thinking about an answer there, let me just remind everyone that we're happy to take questions, and we'll get to those. So please feel free to submit in the question section in your panel. But Jeff, would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, sometimes stress and anxiety migrate into depression. If you hear the symptoms that I gave earlier for Caregiver Burden, well, they're very similar to the symptoms of depression. So, right, can't sleep, changes in sleep, changes in eat, things, anhedonia, one of my favorite words, but it's to describe a feeling. This used to make me feel good, but it doesn't anymore. And all those are not eating right, not sleeping right. And all of those, it's a question of degree. So it's easily about how can I distinguish between what's stress and what's depression. And I think what I would encourage people to do is try the bounce back test, right? If you read all the screenings for depression, they're all about, for the past 2 weeks, have you? And if you can bounce back before those past 2 weeks, those 2 weeks pass, then more likely you're stressed than you are depressed. So it's important, you're going to hear this time and time again from us, to take care of yourself in the ways that we're going to suggest a couple of ways, and Terry already has. And keep a mindfulness about, hey, I'm under stress. I'm more susceptible to these things than I usually am. And see if you can bounce back from it. I think I have to look. I'm sorry, guys. Do good things for yourself, right? One of the things I work with my patients with a lot is, what are you going to do good today, right? What are you going to do for yourself? And in some cases, that's as simple as, I'm going to take a walk around the block. In other cases, it's, gee, I'm going to go get my hair done. I'm going to go get my nails done. I love that. I'm going to go shopping for an hour. I'm going to go out for lunch. So all these things that you put off and feel, well, how can I do these? I don't deserve this. I have somebody to take care of, are important for you to maintain your resilience and the ability to bounce back from stress so it doesn't turn into depression. And then finally, one of the other things I would recommend is the judicious use of respite care. That you can do it in all kinds of ways, for an hour, for 2 hours, or 2 weeks. Gee, somebody who hasn't taken care of your, the person you're caring for, maybe it's their turn for 2 weeks. And that will give you the little bit of respite you need to bounce back. Caregiving in isolation is really hard. Caregiving as a collaboration is still really hard, but much easier to cope with.
Thanks, Jeff. And maybe, we've just had a question come in that I think is a good follow-up on that, which is, how do I balance A, asking family members for more help for respite care, when B, more help from family tends to confuse our elderly father, which C, has tended to make my caregiver job more difficult when the family members leave?
Not uncommon, because not only does your dad get confused, but he often may just be overstimulated by all the people. Respite care has to be carefully planned, right? So that you introduce the person who's going to do the care for you over a period of time, but not for long periods of time. Short bursts. Here's this person. Here's this person. And then use that person for your trip to, get your hair done or shopping or whatever. Go to the gym. Going to the gym is your best friend. And the reason is the exercise produces not only endorphins, but serotonin. So going to the gym right. So it's your best friend. And do it slowly over time so they know that person. It's the quick transitions that are tough to deal with.
I'm just going to add one thing, is from a practical standpoint, if you have an elderly person or a disabled person and you're going to bring somebody who they haven't seen in a long time, just as a practical way, you'll let them know ahead of time that somebody's going to come in, but then also when they greet them at their level. So if they're in a wheelchair, sit down and have that person sit, face to
That's great.
face. Don't come from behind, don't touch from behind. That's such a common human reaction. Like with a parent, if you're approaching them, to put your arm on their shoulder, look at them face to face before you touch and make a gentle touch.
Yeah,
And
thanks,
don't
Sharon.
be afraid to ask permission.
Yes.
So question about stigma associated with mental health and barriers to self-care. So, while we have increasing recognition and sensitivity, those stigmas and those concerns very much still exist. So what typical barriers do you see with patients, Jeff, or caregivers, Terry, and what advice would you have for either overcoming those for oneself or helping a loved one overcome them? Maybe Jeff, if you want to start.
Sure. I think stigma is changing, or the level of stigma is changing.
Mhm.
It's very culturally bound. There are some cultures and religious organizations that have specific directives around psychiatry and that kind of thing. I also think that COVID opened up a whole new world for us when it comes to stigma. The latest statistics I read is that 85% of us will feel depressed, and I certainly see that in my patient load, and other of my colleagues see the same thing. When you look at the utilization statistics for mental health, there's a huge drop off in March. People can't get to their sessions, and a huge spike in April. So we are now there are more people in treatment now than there ever have been before. And so one of the messages, access. How do you get access to something? And I think I'm going to let Terry talk about that. But yeah, I think, and work the stigma directly.
Yeah, so a question came in that I think is related, and particularly because you mentioned the cultural and community-based differences that we see. So let me try to insert this here about addressing health disparities relative to both caregiver burden as well as emotional mental health and diversity of mental health practitioners.
So, so yeah, wow. Let me solve the problems of today. So, are there disparities? You bet. Are the disparities even bigger than we thought they were? Absolutely. And COVID really showed us that. But, even in caretaking, there are cultural differences and resources that are available to some in disparate ways. The only way to solve, there's two things to do. One is to, your version of social involvement. And by that, I mean social justice involvement. How do you want to give money? Do you want to protest? Do you want to, work something or join some organization? But the real issue where the rubber hits the road is one patient at a time. To work with that patient to knock out disparities. If you feel that you're being disparaged against, I don't have a number offhand, but I owe you that. There are places to call, and you should. and they'll help you. But definitely, there's a racial disparity in COVID. It's, been all over the news.
Yeah. So as expected, we're sort of getting close to time. So let me sort of skip forward a little bit. And Terry, I think given your daily interactions with caregivers, what personal or I should say practical recommendations do you often give, or would you make in terms of people who are trying to balance and reduce their own burden and grapple with some of the stressors that they're feeling as caregivers?
Ask for help, ask for help, ask for help. And it can be as simple as scheduling friends or family, or going to your faith community or church to seek someone to come and sit with the person you're caring for so you can run errands, or maybe finding a group of people who would prepare easy to freeze and prepare meals to take that burden off. If we take these little burdens off, it just gives you a little bit more space for yourself, and that's how you build on it. The mental health issue is a big. There's lots of solutions for the stress, anxiety, and depression. And one of the things, if you are employed and have an employee assistance program, call them up and get a couple free sessions with a therapist. If you're suspecting you're stressed, depressed, or anxious, sometimes it just takes like a tune-up with a couple sessions with a therapist, and then you decide if you want to continue on. Reach out to faith organizations that you're part of, and then if you have access to my care desk, contact us, and we can give you more resources that are specific to your need or your area where you live.
Perfect. And Jeff, you were kind enough to give us sort of 3 things to do, which everybody can find in the handout section. But can you just give us sort of an overview of what you recommend for folks?
Yeah, the first one's a corollary to Terry. You can ask for help, but accepting it is something different.
Huge.
When somebody offers you a hand, take it. It's often a friendly hand. Okay? And try and focus on the things that you can do and hand off the things that are harder for you to do. And having frank negotiations around this with people who will help you will improve the coordination between the two of you and give you a little bit of rest. Make sure your goals are realistic, and break large tasks into little ones. This is one of my favorite things to tell people. Nothing succeeds like success. So if you're looking at this overwhelming list of tasks that you have to do for you and your family and take care of somebody, they can be overwhelming. Break them down into small, doable units and working that way. And finally, get connected. And this is, the message we keep telling you. But you want to do not just support groups, but your own support groups. So you can connect to if it's a specific disease, sometimes they come with their own support groups. Stroke does, cardiac does. And you can find those at your local hospital. Amazing organizations like Caregiver can really help as well. So the 3 things, again, accept the help, get connected, and make things doable. Break big things into small things.
Excellent. So we're right at time. Thank you both so much. Thank you everyone for joining. We hope it was helpful. A few notes as we let you go. Again, the 3 things to do and bios are in the handouts. After we close, we're going to be asking for feedback on this session and future sessions. So we use that feedback to help determine our schedule. And so your response is very much appreciated. We have upcoming webinars on senior living, in-home care, and preventative care, and we encourage you to join us in those. Links will come in our follow-up, and we will also send a recording of this webinar, which you're free to share with anyone who you think might find it helpful. Thank you again. The entire Carelel team is wishing you the best and appreciates all that you do on behalf of those you love. So thank you and have a great day.
Bye, everyone.